The April morning of 2006 began with an unusual disturbance on Pierce Street. 5 unmarked OSBI vehicles quietly pulled up in front of a modest single-story house in Muskogee, Oklahoma. Neighbors peered from behind curtains as tactical-clad investigators silently positioned themselves around the property. Inside, 63-year-old Walter Price was brewing his morning coffee, a routine he had maintained for more than 3 decades. As a diligent auto mechanic, living quietly and familiar to the neighborhood, a rapid knock came at 7:04 a.m. Walter Price, Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. "We have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the 1977 disappearance of Emily Ellison." Officers later recalled that his hand trembled slightly as he set the mug on the kitchen counter, but his face remained unnaturally calm, as if he had carried this moment for nearly 30 years. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. August 1977, in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, was enveloped in the dry, scorching heat of late summer. Dusty dirt roads stretched between the sparsely populated Cookson Hills, creating a slow, steady rhythm of life that seemed unchanging. In that setting, the Ellison family attended First Baptist Church, where the father served as pastor and their 12-year-old daughter, Emily Ellison, was involved in summer Bible classes. Emily had a clear schedule, mornings helping her mother with chores, afternoons at church activities, then biking home along County Road 784, a familiar route, less than 2 miles long, that she traveled nearly every day. On August 14th, Emily left the church grounds at 3:10 p.m., riding her small silver-blue bicycle, expected to arrive home by around 3:30 p.m. as usual. Her route remained unchanged, turning out of the church parking lot, following the dirt road along the eastern tree line, crossing the open stretch beside the soybean field, then turning right onto the driveway home. But by 3:45 p.m., Emily had not appeared. The unusual delay prompted her mother to step onto the porch, gazing down the dusty road, but seeing only the quiet stillness of late afternoon. Her father, finishing work at the church, returned home and immediately joined his wife in walking the familiar route to search for signs of their daughter. They checked turnoffs, knocked on nearby doors, looked into ditches and roadside brush, calling Emily's name repeatedly with no response. By around 4:30 p.m., after covering the entire route Emily usually took without finding any trace, no bicycle, no dropped items, no sign she had stopped at anyone's house, the family's initial concern turned into real fear. Near 5 p.m., after returning home a second time and confirming Emily had not come back on her own, and no one in the family or neighborhood had seen her since leaving church, her parents had no reason to delay further. They decided to call the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office to report their daughter missing. The call reached the Sheriff's Office dispatch around 5 p.m. and was immediately classified as high priority. In a county with rugged forested terrain mixed with residential areas like Tahlequah, any case of a minor not returning home on time required swift response. 2 on-duty officers were dispatched to the Ellison home within minutes, beginning the intake process, recording Emily's physical description, the clothing she wore when leaving church, details of the bicycle, time of departure, expected arrival time, and the daily familiar route she used. After cross-referencing the parents' account with that afternoon's church schedule, the lead officer established Emily's last known point as the rear parking lot area of First Baptist Church, and her intended route as County Road 784, heading northeast. Initial assessment showed no reasonable explanation for Emily to deviate from her path or deliberately delay her return, so police opted for immediate search deployment rather than waiting an observation period, as in runaway or family conflict cases. Around 5:25 p.m., the first search team, 2 officers and 3 local volunteers, was formed, with the search area defined within a 1-mile radius of Emily's usual route, encompassing the full stretch of County Road 784, turnoffs into scattered residences, roadside clearings, and the edge of Cookson Hills. The search proceeded in a simple but rapid pattern. Officers in patrol vehicles swept the main road for obvious signs, such as the bicycle, scattered items, unusual tire tracks or drag marks, while volunteers moved slowly along both shoulders, checking low brush and ditches. Meanwhile, another officer knocked on doors of homes near the route, asking if anyone had seen Emily or any unusual activity between 3 o'clock and 4 p.m. All responses were consistent. No one had seen the girl after she left church, and no one had noticed anything out of the ordinary on the road. Small residential areas along County Road 784 were quickly checked. Front yards, garage entrances, livestock pens, and surrounding land showed nothing belonging to Emily. The dry weather meant the ground held no clear footprints, reducing the chance of determining the victim's direction of travel. By nearly 6 p.m., after thoroughly covering the 1-mile radius without finding any evidence, the search team returned to the starting point to report the situation and prepare to expand the search area. Police's initial observation concluded that if Emily had been injured or experienced a simple mishap like falling off her bike, she should have been found within this radius. The complete absence of any sign made the hypothesis of her voluntarily leaving the route highly unlikely. The total lack of evidence within 1 mile was immediately noted as the first anomaly in the disappearance, raising suspicion that the incident may have occurred more quickly and cleanly than a typical accident scenario. When the initial 1-mile radius yielded no trace, police shifted to an expanded line search pattern, mobilizing additional volunteers from surrounding areas and dividing into 4 teams moving parallel across County Road 784 to ensure no area was missed. Each team was assigned a roughly half-mile segment, advancing in sync while maintaining even spacing to cover the entire ground, low brush, and road edges leading into Cookson Hills. As daylight faded, the search force restructured its approach to prioritize dense areas likely to conceal small objects. Around 7:20 p.m., the southern team discovered an unusual detail: a patch of brush pushed inward, with leaves and small branches compressed into an arc shape inconsistent with wind direction or animal activity. Parting the branches, they spotted a metallic object reflecting flashlight beams. It was Emily's small silver-blue bicycle, lying on its side and nearly hidden by dry leaves. The discovery was immediately reported to the field command post and identified as the first significant evidence since the victim's disappearance. Police cordoned off the area, established a secondary scene, marked boundaries with caution tape, and ordered search teams to withdraw to avoid disturbing potential evidence. Crime scene technicians used portable lights to examine the ground surface around the bicycle, noting no heavy skid marks or deep gouges, indicating the bike had not been thrown or flung down. The distance from the discovery point to the main road was measured at 8 meters, in a straight section where Emily would have had no reason to veer into the brush. When plotted on the original road map, police noted the location was less than a mile from the church and within the area Emily regularly passed, yet its concealed position made it difficult for passers-by to notice unless intentionally looking. Initial assessment indicated that the bicycle's placement in the brush, rather than in the road or on the shoulder, made an accident or simple fall unlikely. Instead, it suggested the item had been moved and placed out of sight. Combining the timing of the discovery, the gap in Emily's disappearance, and the anomalous position of the evidence, police determined this was no longer purely a case of a child lost or in a minor mishap, but likely involved third-party intervention. The bicycle discovery point was designated a secondary scene indicator, formally shifting the case from missing person of unknown cause to suspected criminal abduction or foul play. Immediately after Emily's bicycle was found and the area secured, police began scene analysis to determine how the evidence arrived at that location and assess the likelihood of third-party involvement. They first recorded the precise coordinates of the find using tree landmarks and distance to the main road. Results showed the bike positioned southeast of County Road 784 in a spot invisible from the roadway due to thick brush cover. The bike's orientation, front wheel angled deeper into the thicket, handlebars turned left, was compared to common bicycle accident scenarios, and police noted this arrangement did not match natural inertia if the bike had simply fallen. The rear wheel lacked corresponding scrape marks from a fall, and the dry leaves directly beneath the frame remained largely intact, supporting the hypothesis that the bike had been lifted and placed rather than sliding into position naturally. Based on these observations, police created a scene diagram marking the bicycle's position disturbed brush area, and zones for further contact evidence review. They also expanded the map to define a key investigation triangle formed by County Road 784, the Discovery Point, and the Cookson Hills Edge, an area secluded enough to obscure visibility, yet close to the victim's primary travel path. When categorizing possible means of access to the scene, police divided into 3 groups: strangers using motorized vehicles, acquaintances or locals familiar with Emily's routine, and pedestrians or hunters in the adjacent forest. For strangers, emphasis was placed on the possibility of the perpetrator using a pickup truck or open-bed vehicle, common in rural areas, as it allowed quick approach and departure without drawing attention. If the perpetrator was an acquaintance or local resident, knowledge of the route and Emily's habits could explain selecting a brief stop for approach without commotion. The pedestrian slaughter group was rated lower due to the distance from the main road to the bike location, making rapid access difficult unless the individual was already positioned in the brush beforehand. After completing categorization, police assigned investigation priority levels to each group, while leaving open unverified elements such as footprints, drag marks, or dropped items, elements rarely well preserved on Oklahoma's dry, loose summer soil. Though no specific traces yet indicated the perpetrator's or victim's subsequent direction, the bike's placement in concealment rather than natural fall reinforced the conclusion that criminal involvement was the highest probability at this stage of the investigation. After completing analysis of the bicycle scene, police moved to reconstructing the full timeline from Emily's departure from church to the evidence discovery to pinpoint exactly when she vanished and evaluate the feasibility of related scenarios. The first entry on the timeline was 3:10 p.m., when Emily was confirmed to have left First Baptist Church grounds. At this point, multiple independent sources, including a Bible class teacher and a parent picking up a child, verified her presence. The next milestone was approximately 3:18 p.m., when 2 witnesses living near the start of County Road 784 saw a girl matching Emily's description and clothing biking away from the residential area. Based on the average biking speed of a 12-year-old on packed dirt terrain, police calculated Emily would take 10 to 12 minutes to cover the remaining distance home, meaning she should have arrived between 3:25 and 3:30 p.m. However, the next milestone was the family's growing concern at 3:45 p.m., when Emily had not returned and showed no sign of stopping anywhere. In the timeline, 4:15 p.m. was marked as the family's first check along the route, confirming they had walked County Road 784, but found nothing belonging to Emily, proving the bicycle was not yet at its later discovery location at that time. Using this information, police cross-referenced witness timings to define the window of disappearance, the period when the victim vanished, and concluded the event occurred between 3:15 and 3:35 p.m., with a maximum margin of error of 5 minutes, depending on real conditions. The most critical investigative gap was identified within this roughly 20-minute window, as it represented the only period when a stranger could approach Emily, incapacitate her, and leave the area undetected. Comparing this short time frame with the bicycle's 8-meter displacement from the road, police determined the intervention must have been very rapid, deliberate, and almost certainly involved a slow-moving motorized vehicle along the route. From the data, investigators created a comparison table of Emily's average travel speed, the last witness sighting, and the time a light truck would need to accelerate, stop, approach, and depart the scene. Calculations showed the perpetrator needed under 90 seconds to stop, engage the target, and remove her from the main road if already observing. This figure fit perfectly within the 20-minute gap provided by witnesses and family. Police compiled all data into a linear timeline diagram, highlighting key milestones in red: departure from church, last sighting, the 20-minute gap, and the start of family search. Ultimately, they determined all anomalous events must have occurred before 3:35 p.m., as after that point, the family had passed along the route at least once without detecting Emily's bicycle. This reinforced the hypothesis of a swift, controlled intervention with elements of planning, establishing the 3:35 p.m. window as the critical investigative gap. The focus for all subsequent analysis of vehicles, direction of travel, and individuals capable of accessing the victim. Based on the established investigative gap in the timeline, police began collecting witness statements along County Road 784 to identify any unusual activity between 3:10 and 4 p.m. A list of 18 households within potential observation range of the road was compiled, and officers approached each to gather information using a standardized questionnaire, whether they had seen Emily that afternoon, heard any unusual sounds, or noticed any unfamiliar vehicles entering this lightly traveled road. To ensure accuracy, statements were grouped by witness home location into 3 main segments: near the church, mid-route, and near the Cookson Hills boundary. After compilation and review, police assessed statement reliability based on criteria: alignment of observation time with the timeline, certainty in description, visibility from actual position, and corroboration across independent witnesses. Results showed most statements simply confirmed the road was quiet that afternoon, with no notable social activity. However, 3 recurring important details emerged across multiple accounts. The first detail concerned a suspicious vehicle. 4 witnesses in the mid-route segment reported seeing a dark brown pickup truck moving unusually slowly around 3:20 p.m., coinciding with when Emily was believed to be passing through the area. Witnesses described the truck as having a somewhat raised bed and traveling at a pace inconsistent with normal dirt road traffic. The second detail was the presence of a stranger. 2 witnesses living near the forest access intersection said they saw a man standing at the tree line, facing the road, but not engaged in typical activities like hunting or gathering wood, common in the area. Although witnesses did not see direct interaction between this man and Emily, his presence during the matching investigative gap was noted by police as an anomaly requiring further analysis. The third detail was an unusual sound. A family living mid-road reported hearing a brief metallic impact between 3:20 and 3:25 p.m., a sound they said did not resemble a truck tailgate or common farm tool noise. The sound's timing within the suspect window marked it as a supporting element for situation assessment. All statements were entered into the witness log, with each assigned an identifier code and observation position on the map for easy cross-referencing with the timeline, scene diagram, and other collected data. Police simultaneously prioritized the statements. The pickup truck descriptions received high priority due to corroboration across multiple independent witnesses. The stranger sightings were medium priority due to lack of detailed description. The unusual sound was supporting, more valuable when combined with other data than standing alone. Upon completing the review, investigators concluded that within the critical 20-minute window, the road showed signs of a vehicle consistent with purposeful movement, an individual positioned for observation, and an unexplained acoustic event. 3 elements police recorded as having initial value in building a hypothesis about how the victim was approached. Based on the repeated witness statements about the dark brown pickup truck appearing during the critical time window, police shifted to reviewing vehicle registrations within a 20-mile radius of County Road 784, an area deemed wide enough to encompass all local residents, temporary workers, and individuals who might have passed through the area that afternoon. Registration lists from Cherokee County and adjacent jurisdictions were retrieved, and then filtered according to criteria, matching the witness descriptions: brown or dark brown color. Popular pickup truck models in 1970s, Oklahoma, such as Ford F-Series, Chevrolet C, Chevrolet CK Series, or Dodge D-Series, and a bed style corresponding to the description of slightly raised bed. During cross-checking, police excluded vehicles registered in other colors, those with expired registrations, or light-duty models that did not fit the description. They also added exclusion conditions for vehicles with recent repair histories or recent paint changes, as these would not match the description at the time of the incident. After applying the technical filters, the list was narrowed to 31 vehicles owned by individuals scattered across Tahlequah, Park Hill, Keys, and parts of the area near the edge of Cookson Hills. However, 31 vehicles remained too large a number for the investigative resources available in 1977 to check manually. So police applied further filtering based on current registration status, excluding vehicles in repair shops, those reported as unused on the day of the incident, and those owned by businesses located far from the route. After the second filtering stage, the number dropped to 18 vehicles. In the next step, police categorized by model year to prioritize those common during the period, as witnesses described the truck as having an older but not excessively worn appearance, consistent with models produced between 1968 and 1975. Newer, or significantly older models were assigned to a lower priority check group. After applying this criterion, the list was reduced to 14 vehicles, each belonging to a different owner, but all within range of accessing County Road 784. On the afternoon of the incident, police compiled a list including each owner's name, address, distance from home to the scene, vehicle type, model year, and information about household members or frequent users of the vehicle. These data were entered into an analysis diagram to support subsequent alibi verification and interviews. Narrowing the list from hundreds of registered vehicles down to 14 matching vehicles marked a significant investigative advance, allowing police to concentrate resources on the small group of vehicles with the highest likelihood of relevance and laying the groundwork for identifying individuals to be interviewed in the next phase. With the list of 14 vehicle owners identified from the registration review, police implemented a plan to interview each owner to verify alibis and narrow the suspect pool. The process followed a standardized format to ensure data comparability, the owner's whereabouts or workplace during the afternoon of the incident, who could confirm their location, who used the vehicle that day, and whether the vehicle traveled along County Road 784 between 3:10 and 4 p.m. The first group of 6 owners lived near the central Tahlequah area, and most had solid alibis. 2 were at work with time clocks confirmed by supervisors. 1 was taking a child to the hospital in Muskogee with an admission receipt. 1 was participating in community repair work with multiple witnesses. The remaining 2 were at home with confirmation from spouses and neighbors. These statements were cross-checked by contacting witnesses or verifying travel times, and no contradictions emerged that warranted keeping them on the suspect list. The second group of 4 owners lived in outlying forest edge areas or along secondary roads and were interviewed on the same day. Among them, 3 had fairly clear alibis. 1 reported his vehicle had been borrowed by his son to haul building materials in Park Hill, confirmed by a materials receipt. Another was at a gas station in Keys during the investigative gap, captured on the station's camera. The third was attending a family gathering with over 10 witnesses. All 3 were assessed as unlikely to be involved. The final owner in this group stated his vehicle had not been used that day and remained in the garage all afternoon. However, cross-checking with neighbors confirmed the vehicle never left the property, eliminating him from the investigation. After clearing 10 individuals through cross-verified statements and timeline checks, police moved to the remaining 4 owners who lacked clear alibis or had conflicting initial information. The first claimed he was at home repairing a fence but had no one to confirm it. Neighbors only recalled his vehicle not being in its usual spot mid-afternoon. The second said his vehicle was borrowed by his brother, but the brother provided inconsistent information about the travel route. Additionally, departure and return times did not align with actual distances. The third, a freelance laborer living near the Cookson Hills entrance, claimed he slept at home from 2 o'clock to 5 p.m., but prior records showed he frequently left home during those hours to haul scrap wood. That time frame could not be verified, making his statement suspicious. The final person on the list was Walter Price, an auto mechanic, who claimed he worked at his garage all afternoon. However, there was no time clock, no customers or coworkers to confirm, and his daily commute routinely passed along County Road 784, making his potential presence at the scene noteworthy. These 4 were placed on a watch list based on the ambiguity of their alibis, proximity of residents to the scene, and access to the route where Emily disappeared. Individual files were expanded to include vehicle condition, usage history, family relationships, employment, and routine travel patterns. Narrowing from 14 vehicle owners to 4 individuals marked a critical screening step, allowing police to focus resources on those most likely connected to the dark brown pickup observed during the investigative gap, and to continue clarifying their involvement in Emily Ellison's disappearance on that August afternoon in 1977. After narrowing the suspect list to 4 individuals unable to prove alibis, police moved to detailed analysis of each person based on three groups of factors: residence location, relative to the scene, daily routine, and vehicle travel habits. The first of the four lived about 3 miles southwest of County Road 784, an area minimally connected to the route described by witnesses for the dark brown pickup. Prior travel records showed he rarely used Route 784, instead primarily traveling to downtown via the northern main road. Although his alibi was unverified, the likelihood of his presence near Emily's disappearance point was rated low. The second suspect lived in an eastern Tahlequah suburb, more than 5 miles from the main route. While his vehicle matched the description, his schedule showed fixed work hours with no reasonable cause to leave home between 3 o'clock and 4 p.m., unless for a specific purpose. Officers noted an inconsistency in statements between the brothers regarding vehicle use, but nothing indicated his familiarity with Route 784, a secondary route mainly used by residents near the church and scattered farms. The third suspect lived right at the edge of Cookson Hills, about 2 miles north of the bicycle discovery site. The proximity to the forest temporarily raised attention. However, analysis of his travel habits based on neighbors' statements showed he typically used forest trails to haul scrap wood and very rarely entered County Road 784. Moreover, his usual forest routes ran in the opposite direction from where witnesses saw the dark brown pickup, reducing his fit with the suspect vehicle. The final case, Walter Price, stood out above the other three due to multiple simultaneous alignments with investigative data. Price's home was less than 1.5 miles from the scene, along Route 784, precisely the area where witnesses described the dark brown pickup moving slowly and unusually. According to neighbors, he frequently left his garage at flexible hours and traveled in his dark brown pickup, his primary vehicle for carrying parts and repair tools. Price's daily routine allowed him to pass County Road 784 multiple times, and the lack of anyone confirming his whereabouts from 3 o'clock to 4 p.m. made that time frame the largest question mark in his personal file. Additionally, the nature of his work, frequently driving alone with little time supervision, fit the profile of someone who could move freely unnoticed. When cross-referenced with area maps, police found that Price's usual route, from garage to home, fully overlapped with the segment where witnesses observed the brown vehicle around 3:20 p.m. Furthermore, his home's location placed him within quick access to the bicycle discovery site, increasing the possibility he was in the area during the critical window. Officers assessed this as the most logically connected chain of factors among the four: favorable geographic position, matching vehicle description, unverified schedule, and travel habits, aligning with Emily's route. Although no direct incriminating evidence existed, the degree of overlap made Price the most prominent subject for deeper questioning. Police concluded the next step must be gathering additional behavioral data and detailed statements from Price to determine whether his presence near the scene coincided with the victim's disappearance and whether his pickup was the vehicle witnesses saw on County Road 784 that afternoon. Walter Price was invited to the sheriff's office for questioning the following morning, in a context where the other three suspects lacked any standout elements to make them the focus. While Price possessed the full combination of geographic and travel habit characteristics matching the investigative data. In the first interview, Price outlined his work schedule on the day Emily disappeared. He claimed that from about 1 o'clock to 5 p.m., but he was at the garage repairing two regular customers' vehicles, one needing an oil filter replacement and the other requiring an ignition system check. When asked to provide customer names or proof of his presence at the garage, Price could only produce a handwritten note on his workbench and stated the customers had dropped off the vehicles in the morning and returned to pick them up late afternoon. However, police cross-checked the timing and called the phone number of the regular customer Price named. The individual confirmed dropping off the vehicle in the morning, but arriving after 5:30 p.m. to retrieve it without directly meeting Price between 3 o'clock and 5 o'clock. This made Price's statement not fully consistent with reality, though insufficient to conclude intentional concealment. Officers also inquired about Price's normal work travel routes, in which he admitted that to go from the garage to home, he frequently used County Road 784 as the shortest path. When specifically asked about the period from 3:10 to 3:40 p.m. on the day of the incident, Price replied that he was definitely at the garage, but could provide no witnesses or documentation proving he was there at that exact time. Even co-workers who sometimes worked with him were not present at the garage that day. Regarding the dark brown pickup, Price acknowledged it was his only vehicle and that it could have been parked outside the garage all afternoon. When asked to describe his vehicle usage habits on workdays, Price said he might leave and return to the garage at any time to fetch tools or swap parts, but he could not clearly recall whether he left the garage by vehicle during the afternoon of the victim's disappearance. This lack of clarity made his file increasingly noteworthy. However, procedurally, police found no physical evidence directly linking Price to Emily's bicycle or any specific traces at the secondary scene. There were no signs of resistance, no overtly contradictory statements amounting to criminal concealment, and no witness saw Price approach Emily, so investigators lacked legal grounds to detain him or search his personal property. The interview concluded with police recording all statements, flagging several points for re-verification, including customer pickup times, Price's garage presence timing, and his frequent travel routes, but without sufficient grounds to elevate him to official suspect status. The final conclusion of this phase was that Price was classified as a potential suspect, a category requiring continued monitoring due to his fit with current investigative data, but without specific evidence to define his role in Emily Ellison's disappearance. After the initial interview with Walter Price yielded no verifiable information to further narrow the suspect pool, police shifted focus back to the field and expanded search operations into the Cookson Hills area, where dense forest terrain could conceal traces that residential roads did not provide. To conduct searches across hundreds of acres, investigators created a grid dividing the forest into searchable squares, each small enough for a team of 3 to 4 people to cover in about an hour. Grids were marked using paper maps and compasses, as 1977 lacked modern positioning equipment. Officers relied on natural features such as trails, dry creeks, and large tree clusters to define boundaries. Search priority was given to grids near Route 784 and areas with trails leading deeper into the forest, points a perpetrator could use for quick movement without detection by residents. However, search conditions in Cookson Hills at that time faced severe limitations. Steep terrain, rocky ground, and thick underbrush slowed large-scale movement far more than anticipated. Police had only low-power flashlights, a few handheld radios, and outdated printed topographic maps, none sufficient for organizing a high-accuracy large-scale search in deep woods. Manpower was also a major issue. The small county force, combined with an initial volunteer pool, insufficient to sustain continuous effort in remote areas far from main roads. Search teams had to return to rally points more frequently than planned to avoid getting lost, reducing overall efficiency. Some marked grids had difficult access, deep gullies, rock crevices, fallen trees blocking paths, forcing teams to skip them initially and defer evaluation, risking oversight of potential traces. Throughout the review of forest grids near the bicycle discovery site, no signs suggested the victim had entered the woods, no drag marks, no scraps of fabric or small items, no footprints matching size. Areas that might show ground disturbance were unclear due to thick summer leaf cover, completely masking minor changes. Darkness fell quickly under the canopy, further limiting search time. By day's end, all priority areas near Route 784 had been thoroughly searched twice, but no traces indicated Emily or anyone else had moved through the area after her disappearance. The expansion into Cookson Hills produced no specific results, but police documented all checked grids to avoid redundant effort in later phases. Although no physical traces emerged, the process reinforced the assessment that if the victim had been moved into the forest, it did not occur in the near-road area already searched, or it occurred in a way undetectable by 1977's manual search methods. After completing the expanded Cookson Hills search without new traces, investigators returned to evaluating all collected evidence to date, with the most important still being Emily's bicycle, the only item currently under control. However, forensic analysis capabilities in Oklahoma in 1977 had significant limitations, causing the bicycle to yield less investigative value than hoped. First, police examined the frame, handlebars, pedals, and seat for unfamiliar fingerprints or signs of physical interference, but the surface was mainly covered in dry dust and smudged prints, likely from Emily's prior use. Since fingerprint identification technology at the time relied on manual comparison without a comprehensive database, the blurred prints could not be matched or used to identify anyone. Wheels were checked for differential soil adhesion, but 1977 lacked micro-mineral analysis or regional soil composition techniques, so soil on the tires was only descriptively noted and could not pinpoint prior locations. Any fibers or materials adhering to the frame, if present, were not handled per molecular preservation standards, rendering microfiber analysis virtually impossible. Officers also inspected the bike sides for scratch or crack marks from heavy impact, but the structure was entirely intact, ruling out a natural fall, yet providing no information about who placed it at the discovery site. Regarding footprints, the dry brush scene caused shallow, easily disturbed impressions upon search team approach, preventing size or sole pattern determination. These traces were photographed for record, but could not be classified or compared by period standards. Beyond the bicycle, police re-reviewed the entire search route and initial sweep reports, but no fabric scraps, dropped items, or signs of struggle were noted. There was no blood evidence, no abandoned foreign objects, and no biological samples analyzable by 1970s forensic technology. Even the described dark brown pickup left no clear tire impressions due to the frequently trafficked dirt road surface obscuring tracks, making vehicle tracing at the scene nearly impossible via manual tire comparison. Summarizing the full evidence evaluation, the investigative team concluded that while the bicycle proved third-party interference in the victim's travel, no forensic evidence from it could identify the perpetrator or subsequent direction of movement. The absence of trace analysis capability, combined with 1970s technical context, left the investigation stalled. All data collected to date remain descriptive, incapable of deep verification or precise suspect narrowing. All hypotheses at this point could only rely on inference and observed behavior, without forensic tools strong enough to produce a breakthrough. The re-evaluation of evidence and the scene yielded no new data, forcing police to confront the reality that the entire initial investigative process had reached its limit. In the following days, investigators continued gathering information from the community in hopes that a late witness might emerge, but every call received was either vague observations or statements that didn't match the timeline, lacking sufficient value to add to the file. No one had seen Emily after leaving the church beyond the witnesses who had already provided statements, and no one reported any new suspicious activity on or near County Road 784. Officers also reswept the bicycle discovery area one more time in search of small items or overlooked traces, but the thick layer of dry leaves, loose soil, and mixed footprints from the search teams had completely disturbed the surface, leaving no possibility of recovering any intact signs. When cross-referencing all collected data, witness statements, bicycle location, scene analysis, Cookson Hill's search results, and forensic evaluation, police recognized that no lead was specific enough to expand the investigation toward identifying a perpetrator. The potential suspects, including Walter Price, lacked physical evidence or direct witness links to Emily's disappearance, while their inconsistent statements still fell short of providing legal grounds to proceed further. Additionally, manpower and resource pressures on the Cherokee County Law Enforcement Agency in 1977 made sustaining large-scale searches for consecutive weeks unfeasible. Volunteer search groups also dwindled as time passed without progress. By the end of the month, the investigative team was compelled to scale back operations and maintain only passive monitoring, awaiting new information should any individual come forward. Emily Ellison's missing person file was reclassified as an inactive case, meaning no active investigation would continue, but the file would remain on record for potential reopening if new evidence or witnesses surfaced in the future. Documents, including scene maps, witness statements, suspect lists, limited forensic reports, and all search operation logs, were sealed, marking the end of the initial investigative phase. At that time, police could not foresee that the absence of modern investigative techniques and usable physical evidence would leave the case in prolonged limbo. And Emily Ellison's file gradually became a true cold case, one with no direction, no new data, and no resolution for many years to come. From 1978 to 2005, Emily Ellison's file existed as a typical cold case, no substantial progress, but never completely forgotten, as the disappearance of a 12-year-old child always generated a certain level of ongoing local community interest. In the first few years after the case was deemed inactive, small volunteer groups, mostly family acquaintances, town residents and local hunters, continued spontaneous searches in the Cookson Hills forest. They typically followed old trails, checked rock crevices, low-lying areas, or spots near dry creeks in hopes of finding personal items or any overlooked signs. However, due to the lack of official coordination and no scientific search methodology, these efforts rarely produced results, and the checked areas often overlapped repeatedly without expanding into more inaccessible regions. Meanwhile, law enforcement occasionally received scattered tips from residents inside and outside the county, including numerous reports of sightings of a girl about Emily's age in nearby towns or appearances of strangers deemed suspicious. But upon verification, most proved to be rumors, duplicates, or completely mismatched in time and description. Some calls came from people claiming their children had recounted meeting a man in the woods, but these scenarios lacked supporting evidence and were usually dismissed after basic questioning. More noteworthy were reports tied to other scattered child disappearances in the region during 1980 and 1983, briefly prompting community speculation of a connection. However, each was determined to have its own perpetrator or distinct circumstances unrelated to Emily's case. The list of 4 remaining suspects from 1977 was periodically reviewed each time the file was revisited, typically when a new officer took over part of the cold case backlog, yet, without new physical evidence or fresh witness statements directly tying them to the case, the list could neither be expanded nor narrowed further. The original suspects, including Walter Price, remained classified only as not proven innocent but lacking sufficient evidence of involvement, leaving them in a state of prolonged suspicion without advancing to active investigative stages. A few efforts to re-review existing documents by county police in the late 1980s and early 1990s aimed to assess the applicability of emerging techniques such as criminal profiling or scene diagramming, but these methods were still too rudimentary and ineffective for a case that had almost no physical evidence from the outset. Even as Oklahoma's forensic capabilities advanced to more sophisticated trace analysis in the late 1990s, Emily's case could not benefit from the new methods due to the absence of suitable samples for testing. The bicycle and scene photographs contained too little data to exploit under updated standards. Over more than 2 decades, the Emily Ellison cold case remained stagnant, existing as a thin file with a few pages of notes, route maps, scattered witness statements, and an unchanged suspect list. No new evidence surfaced, no new witnesses appeared, and no breakthrough emerged sufficient to reopen the investigation proactively. Only Cookson Hills continued to be mentioned by locals as the shadowy area of the case, but no one had clear grounds for deeper survey. As years passed, the file gradually slipped to the bottom of priority cases and became one of Cherokee County's long unsolved disappearances, until an unexpected event many years later altered its dormant status. In March 2006, after nearly 3 decades of the Emily Ellison case remaining dormant, a chance discovery in Cookson Hills upended the file that had seemingly faded into oblivion. During expansion of a Forestry Service road in the Northern Hill area, a logging crew noticed unusual ground subsidence beneath their feet while gathering dry branches. Clearing the layer of decayed leaves above, they saw white bone fragments protruding from shallow soil, initially assumed to be animal bones given the area's frequent wildlife. However, the shape of the long bone segment and the curved structure resembling ribs immediately raised suspicion that these could be human remains. Recognizing the gravity of the find, the crew promptly contacted authorities and halted work. County police units arrived quickly, cordoned off the area, and contacted the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation to coordinate forensic handling. Upon OSBI's arrival at the scene, they established a roughly 20-meter radius perimeter, dividing the area into small grids for systematic bone collection. In the initial survey alone, forensic specialists identified at least 4 human bone types, including femur, humerus, rib, and a small portion of mandible. Based on size and degree of mineralization, the forensic team preliminarily concluded the remains could belong to an individual aged 10 to 12, matching Emily Ellison's age at the time of her 1977 disappearance. The area around the excavation site also yielded several potentially related items. Near a large rock, about 2 meters from the bones, investigators found a decayed fabric fragment. Though colors had faded, the weave indicated it had once been thin cotton material, common in children's clothing of the late 1970s. Not far away, inside a rotted tree stump, they discovered a short gray-brown rope segment, heavily decomposed on the outer layer, but retaining an inner fiber core, suggesting it had once been knotted or tied in a fixed manner. Although severe decomposition prevented immediate determination of the item's roles, OSBI documented and sealed everything for later analysis. Notably, the bone discovery location lay entirely outside the grids, searched by 1977 teams, proving that Cookson Hills still contained unchecked areas due to difficult terrain. Investigators also observed site characteristics. The overlying soil layer was only 15 to 20 centimeters deep, insufficient for long-term concealment if exposed to heavy rain erosion or animal digging. This led to the hypothesis that the bones may have gradually surfaced due to natural erosion over time, rather than being deeply buried from the start. Upon completing bone and evidence collection, OSBI prepared a scene report marking relative positions for future spatial reconstruction. Although positive identification of the remains could not be made on site, the age characteristics and geographic location immediately led many experienced Cherokee County investigators to associate the find with the Emily Ellison cold case, one of the few long unsolved child disappearances in the region. Discovery information was rapidly relayed to OSBI headquarters and county police to prepare subsequent forensic analysis steps, raising hope that after nearly 30 years, this seemingly dormant case might finally have a new starting point for comprehensive reinvestigation. After the remains and adjacent evidence were transported to the OSBI laboratory in Oklahoma City, modern forensic examination commenced immediately to identify the victim. The first step was dental analysis. As in long-term cases, dental structure is often the most durable identifier. From 1977 records, Cherokee County Police still retained Emily Ellison's dental x-rays provided by the family at the time of her disappearance, featuring 2 distinctive traits: a slightly rotated upper incisor and a small filling in the lower left molar from cavity treatment a few months earlier. When forensic specialists compared the dental structures recovered from the newly excavated mandible, they quickly noted clear matches. The incisor rotation aligned almost perfectly with the old images, and the filling cavity location on the lower left molar, though the material had degraded over time, still showed the characteristic drill pattern. This match achieved high reliability, but OSB continued with supplementary verification steps to rule out any possible discrepancies. Next came skeletal age assessment through analysis of long bone epiphyseal closure and mineralization levels in the femur, humerus, and ribs. Results indicated fusion stages consistent with a pre-adolescent individual, specifically around 11 to 13 years old, aligning with Emily's age of 12 at disappearance. The forensic team further examined other indicators such as bone length ratios and natural wear patterns, while also evaluating unerupted tooth development in the lower jaw, all consistent with the age described in records. Concurrently, specialists conducted anthropological analysis, unique anatomical features, sometimes absent from medical records, but useful for distinguishing individuals. One rib from the remains displayed a very minor deformity, a slight concavity, typically congenital and harmless. Emily's family had noted in 1973 medical records that a pediatrician observed a minor deviation in one right side rib, not concerning, and though no illustrative images existed from that time, the descriptive match led forensic experts to view it as strong supporting evidence for identification. Modern methods such as bone microstructure analysis, mineral density quantification, and comparison of bone length ratios to U.S. child growth data from the late 1970s further reinforced the conclusion. Although no DNA sample from 1977 existed for direct comparison, current forensic techniques allowed a near-certain conclusion based on the aggregate of biological, dental, and skeletal age characteristics. Upon completing the full process, OSBI issued an official determination. The remains discovered in Cookson Hills in March 2006 belonged to Emily Ellison, the victim missing since 1977. The forensic report was forwarded to the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office with a recommendation to reopen the investigation as a criminal matter. Given the skeletal distribution pattern and accompanying evidence, including fabric fragment and rope segment, suggesting possible foul play prior to the body being placed in the forested area. Confirmation of the remains' identity marked the first major turning point after nearly 30 years of stagnation, returning the entire case to priority status and opening the first opportunity since 1977 to pursue the perpetrator using new forensic data. After OSBI confirmed the remains as Emily Ellison's, the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office immediately initiated case reactivation procedures, the first step being digitization of all 1977 investigative data, which existed only in paper form, scene photographs, and loose notes. Much of the old material had faded, with many pages wrinkled or showing mold from long-term storage, so digitization required careful scanning of each page with specialized equipment to prevent information loss. Route maps, search diagrams, investigators' handwritten notes, and witness interview transcripts were all imported into OSBI's new digital case management system, enabling vertical analysis, tagging, and cross-linking of data far more efficiently than previous manual methods. 1977 scene photographs, including the bicycle location, angles of disturbed brush, and faint ground trace shots, were enhanced using image quality restoration software to maximize recoverable detail. Once digitization was complete, the investigative team restructured the file, categorizing all data by relevance to identify elements supporting modern reinvestigation. Data were divided into 5 main groups: witness statements, evidence and scene evaluation, suspect list and related profiles, search operations, and old forensic documents. In the witness statements group, all 1977 road witnesses were entered as individual profiles, tagged by observation time, standing position, and reliability rating from the time. This allowed investigators to easily identify recurring details, such as the dark brown pickup description, and compare consistency across multiple sources. The evidence group was reclassified, with Emily's bicycle, scene photos, and position diagrams placed in a dedicated folder for re-evaluation using modern forensic technology. Though most traces had been lost, image data, locations, and descriptions retained value when combined with new algorithmic scene analysis models. The suspect list group retained the 4 names not cleared in 1977, with detailed profiles, including addresses, occupations, owned vehicles, travel history, and original statements. Notably, Walter Price's file was flagged for high priority due to the alignment of location and described vehicle at the time of the victim's disappearance. 1977, 1978, search operations, including Cookson Hills grid setup maps and surveyed areas, were reconstructed digitally. This enabled overlaying information onto current topographic maps to identify unchecked zones or areas with terrain changes over time, aiding analysis of perpetrator movement possibilities. Old forensic documents, extremely limited, were still entered for cross-reference, particularly regarding shallow burial assessment and the 2006 noted fabric and rope evidence. Upon completing data categorization, the team began reconstructing the full case timeline in digital form, spanning from Emily's departure from church on August 14, 1977, to the 2006 remains discovery. The timeline was divided into 3 phases: disappearance phase, initial investigation phase, and cold case phase. The disappearance phase was mapped minute by minute based on witness statements, average bicycle travel speed, and bicycle discovery location. The digital system automatically plotted data points onto the route map, creating a clear time-space corridor, illustrating the 20-minute window of the victim's vanishing. The initial investigation phase was built according to search progression, surveyed areas, and suspect interview rounds. The timeline clearly displayed stagnation points: no new witnesses after day 3, no additional evidence after the bicycle find, and no suspicious activity linked to suspects in subsequent months. The cold case phase depicted nearly 3 decades of silence, with sporadic markers, including occasional civilian searches, erroneous tips, and file reviews that produced no progress. Finally, 2006 events, remains discovery, adjacent evidence, and forensic confirmation of Emily Ellison's identity were added, marking the case's shift from inactive to active for the first time in 29 years. Digital timeline reconstruction allowed a comprehensive overview, impossible with paper archiving, continuity across phases, information gaps, weak connections among old data, and how the new discovery could relink the entire case. Once the system was finalized, the investigative team determined that the Emily Ellison cold case had entered an entirely new phase, with a clear, structured data foundation ready for modern analysis. After full digitization of the 1977 data, the investigative team began applying GIS technology to analyze spatial relationships among key case points, aiming to determine perpetrator movement possibilities and geographic links between the initial scene and the remains discovery site. Locations entered into the model included Emily's bicycle discovery point on County Road 784, the 2006 remains site on the northern slope of Cookson Hills, the First Baptist Church grounds, last place the victim was seen, and the network of natural trails running through Cookson Hills within a 5-mile radius. GIS data enabled reconstruction of 1977 terrain via elevation maps, vegetation cover, and old dirt roads, many of which no longer exist or have eroded over time. When plotting the points on the map, a striking detail emerged. The bicycle location and body location did not lie along the same natural path. The straight-line distance between the two was about 3.4 miles, but actual walking routes along 1977 trails could extend 5-6 miles due to hilly terrain and rock crevices. This indicated the victim could not have traveled to the body site on her own, especially if the initial disappearance hypothesis assumed Emily suffered a mishap and left the road. The long, difficult distance exceeded a child's capability in a short time frame, and under conditions where no traces were recorded by 1977. Search teams. GIS analysis further identified 3 feasible directions from the bicycle discovery point for moving the victim into the forest. The first was eastward, the shortest geographically, but limited by steep slopes and exposed rock, making transport of another person difficult without prior preparation. The second was northwest, an older but longer trail, often used by hunters due to numerous dry creeks. The third was northward, the only route with sufficiently dense vegetation cover and seclusion to allow undetected movement from the main road. Simulating small motorized vehicle movement along County Road 784, GIS showed that stopping near the bicycle site and then transporting the victim northward or northwest into the forest was the most plausible scenario. Moving the victim deeper into the woods along these routes could be accomplished in 20-30 minutes, depending on speed and carrying capacity, allowing the perpetrator to return to the main road or exit the area unnoticed. Another key analysis step was reconstructing 1977 concealment environment. Old vegetation maps indicated the body discovery area once had medium to dense tree cover, thicker than today due to heavy logging in the 1980s and 1990s. This supported the assessment that the perpetrator may have chosen the site for its high natural concealment, ease of hiding a body, and low early detection risk. The team also ran least resistance path simulations, modeling the easiest route based on natural terrain. Results showed the most feasible path a terrain-familiar individual could use from County Road 784 to the body site was a small trail crossing a hillside with low slope and few obstacles. This trail did not appear on 1977 public maps because it was used only by frequent forest travelers, hunters, wood gatherers, or local residents. The perpetrator's selection of this hard-to-detect route led to a significant conclusion. The subject was highly likely someone familiar with Cookson Hills terrain, knowledgeable about trails, and capable of forest movement without leaving obvious traces. Cross-referencing this information with 1977 suspect data, the investigative team noted that among the 4 remaining suspects, only one had lived long-term near Cookson Hills and regularly traveled forest trails, Walter Price. Although the GIS conclusion did not name the perpetrator, it provided a critical spatial-temporal foundation to reorient the investigation, establishing that the criminal behavior required terrain familiarity satisfied by only a small group of local residents. Building on this analysis, the investigative team prepared the next step to re-examine suspects using the new spatial data. After completing the GIS analysis and determining that the perpetrator must have been someone familiar with the Cookson Hills terrain, the investigative team moved to re-evaluating all 1977 witness statements using modern interview techniques, with a focus on the timeline memory recall method adopted by OSBI since the 2000s. All witnesses who lived along County Road 784 and those who participated in the initial search were invited in for interviews, each conducted separately to minimize mutual influence. First, investigators cross-referenced each original statement with audio recordings or handwritten notes to identify ambiguous points, time gaps, or descriptions that had not been deeply explored due to 1977 technical limitations. Witnesses who had reported seeing a dark brown pickup moving slowly but without describing the driver were prioritized, as they likely observed part of the event without fully realizing its significance at the time. During re-interviews, cognitive forensic interviewers guided witnesses to reconstruct their original observation state by recreating the context, afternoon lighting, their standing position, road sounds, and surrounding activities. Several witnesses still clearly recalled that the road was very quiet at the time, with only a few vehicles passing between 3 o'clock and 4 p.m. When asked to describe the dark brown pickup's movement during the 20-minute window, 2 witnesses said they remembered the vehicle moving slower than normal, as if looking for something, though they still could not describe the driver. While most statements remained consistent with 1977, one middle-aged witness, who had been a 14-year-old teenager living near the forest turnoff, provided a crucial detail not recorded in the old file. In his 1977 interview, he had only reported seeing a man standing near the tree line. But in 2006, when asked to reconstruct the timeframe and aided by the GIS map to pinpoint his observation position, the witness stated that he remembered the man standing next to a brown vehicle parked right at the road's edge, a detail he had never mentioned before. When investigators probed further about the man, the witness said he could not recall the face clearly due to distance, but remembered that the person wore a baseball cap and a thin gray jacket, details matching the everyday clothing description of one of the 1977 suspects, Walter Price. The witness was shown a photograph of Price's 1977 pickup, not for direct identification, but to check if the overall vehicle shape matched his memory. He confirmed that the general appearance, especially the unusually raised bed, closely resembled the vehicle he saw on Route 784 the afternoon Emily disappeared. Investigators then applied the life event anchoring technique, asking the witness to tie the memory to his personal activities that day, such as preparing for school, tending to pets, or family events. He recalled that he had to bring his dog home around 3:25 p.m., and on his way back to the backyard, he saw the pickup parked against the tree line, less than 200 meters from where the bicycle was later found. The activation of this memory through modern techniques led investigators to rate the statement's reliability significantly higher than in 1977. Although the witness could not affirm the man was Price, the description of age, build, and clothing aligned with Price's 1977 profile, and the vehicle's position and behavior near the tree line matched the GIS analysis of the perpetrator's feasible movement direction. This was the first time a witness provided an indirect linking description between the most prominent suspect and the road segment coinciding with the investigative gap. When this information was entered into the digitized system, The witness statement weighting algorithm indicated that the updated witness provided the strongest data since 1977. The re-interview not only created a spatial-temporal connection between Price and the incident route, but also validated the GIS-modeled movement pattern, showing that the perpetrator's presence near the bicycle discovery site at the time of Emily's disappearance had a realistic basis. This elevated Price back to the central suspect position and became the pivotal point for the team to shift to re-evaluating his behavior and personal history using modern technology. After completing the witness re-interviews and updating all new data into the digitized system, the investigative team entered the suspect elimination phase by combining time-space modeling, personal profiles, and behavioral factors. The three remaining suspects besides Walter Price were reassessed first, beginning with cross-referencing their 1977 movement data against the GIS map. The first suspect, who lived about 3 miles southwest of County Road 784, was eliminated after new data showed his daily travel route at the time did not pass through the victim's disappearance area, nor come near any trail branches leading to the remains discovery site. Additionally, re-interviews with neighbors confirmed he typically returned home before 3 p.m. due to his job nature, making his presence at the exact time of the incident virtually impossible. The second suspect, who claimed his vehicle was borrowed by his brother, was eliminated after cross-checking new Department of Public Safety data, which showed his vehicle captured on gas station camera footage during the investigative gap, but at a location too far from Route 784 to reach the scene within the required time frame. Moreover, the GIS speed time model proved the vehicle could not have been in both locations, nearly 12 miles apart, in under 15 minutes, as previously claimed inconsistently by him and his brother. The third suspect, who lived right at the Cookson Hills edge, was also removed when trail analysis technology showed his usual wood-hauling paths did not intersect with trails leading to the body site. During re-interview, he clarified that most of his activities occurred on the opposite side of the ridge, consistent with statements from local hunters. No data linked him to Route 784 or the bicycle discovery site, making his involvement probability extremely low. With the three suspects eliminated by verified modern data, Walter Price became the sole remaining individual on the list. Reanalysis aligning all related factors, vehicle, location, behavior, and timing, made him the focal point. GIS data showed Price's home was closest to both key locations, the bicycle discovery site and the remains site discovered nearly 30 years later. All simulated perpetrator movement routes passed through or near his residential area or overlap trails he likely knew due to his occupation and pickup travel habits in the woods. When cross-referencing timeline data, Price's unverified alibi gap from 3 o'clock to 5 p.m. on the day of the incident precisely matched the 20-minute investigative window, something no other suspect exhibited. While the other three had additional corroboration from witnesses or archived records, Price was the only one unable to provide verifiable proof of his whereabouts at the exact time Emily vanished. Regarding the vehicle, reanalysis of 2006 witness statements, alongside old photos of Price's pickup, showed near-perfect alignment with the 1977 description: dark brown color, raised bed, older style, and frequent appearance on the road near the scene. One witness, after modern technique interview, confirmed the parked vehicle he saw against the tree line looked more like Price's than any other in the area at the time. When all data were fed into the suspect weighting model, OSBI's algorithm assigned Price an 81% probability of involvement, a figure far exceeding the under 10% for the eliminated suspects. Additionally, the witness's description of the man near the tree line, average build, thin gray jacket and baseball cap, fully matched Price's 1977 appearance from driver's license records and garage employment photos. Furthermore, behavior simulation based on the 20-minute gap data showed the perpetrator had to remove the victim from Route 784 in under 2 minutes, load her into the truck bed, and depart before anyone passed by. This fit Price's garage and home location, where he could routinely pass the road unnoticed. Combining all data, the investigative team reached a clear conclusion: Only one suspect fit the complete time-location vehicle behavior chain. Variables that once stalled the 1977 file now converged on a single point. Price was in the area, had a matching vehicle, had an unprovable time gap, and possessed sufficient Cookson Hills terrain knowledge to move the victim deep into the forest. Eliminating the other three suspects simultaneously reinforced the probability that Price was the sole perpetrator, placing him at the center for the agency to proceed to stronger legal steps in building a prosecutable case. With Walter Price as the sole remaining suspect and the time-space data fully aligning with the crime model, the investigative team sought and obtained a search warrant for his property, including the old garage, residence, and a small storage shed behind the yard, where he once kept repair supplies. The warrant was approved based on the new elements: 2006 witness statements, GIS analysis, and vehicle matches. During the initial search at the garage, investigators found a small wooden box under the workbench containing various 1970s documents and personal items. Inside was a yellowed Cookson Hills map with faint circled markings on old trails. Notably, one of the circles was very close to the area where Emily's remains were found in 2006. When cross-referenced with current maps via GIS, the marked area aligned with the most feasible trail, identified by spatial analysis for the perpetrator to transport the victim into the forest. The faded ink and worn map edges indicated Price had used it for many years, possibly since starting his auto repair work and regularly entering the woods for materials. Though the map could not directly prove criminal activity, it was strong indirect evidence of his deep knowledge of Cookson Hills terrain, confirmed by GIS as a required trait for the perpetrator. During the search of the backyard storage shed, investigators found an old toolbox containing a twisted brown-gray rope segment about 1.5 meters long. When compared to a reconstructed sample from the rope fragment found near the remains, the fiber structure and twist pattern showed high similarity despite the seen rope's advanced decomposition. Price's rope exhibited repeated tension wear and frayed sections, signs possibly from repeated pulling or long-term use. Although it could not be definitively tied to the crime, the significant match in construction and color led the team to classify it as potential evidence, especially since this rope type was not common in the area during the 1970s, but was often used by mechanics to secure heavy loads on pickup beds. Expanding the search to the main house, investigators discovered a small drawer behind a wardrobe containing many of Price's old items from before he married. Among them was a tin box holding various buttons, metal snaps, and fabric scraps, not unusual in theory for a mechanic's habit of saving parts. However, one particular button drew attention, a small light blue button, the type commonly found on children's clothing in the 1970s. Its color, molding style, and size matched the description of the shirt Emily's family said she wore on the day she disappeared. Although it could not be conclusively linked to Emily, since the seen fabric fragment was too degraded for direct comparison, the button's presence in Price's possessions raised reasonable suspicion about its origin. Investigators noted that Price had no daughters, granddaughters, or young female relatives living with him in 1977, making ownership of a light blue child's button anomalous. When synthesizing the three main items, the marked Cookson Hills map, the rope segment, and the blue button, the investigative team assessed their relevance across three categories: investigative value, linkage to the victim, and linkage to the crime method. The map was classified as strong indirect strategic evidence. It demonstrated Price's detailed terrain knowledge, consistent with the perpetrator's movement model, and explaining how the body was placed in a location virtually unknown except to trail familiar individuals. The rope was placed in the high-potential linkage group due to similar fiber characteristics with the seen sample. Though DNA or microfiber identification was impossible due to decomposition, the near-identical construction and color created significant connection to possible victim restraint, fitting the hypothesis of Emily being subdued quickly within the 20-minute gap. The blue button was rated as having direct victim linkage potential, though not conclusive. However, the children's item, nature in the possessions of a single man at the time, with no close ties to young children, made it a behavioral red flag. When the three items were entered into the digitized analysis system, the weighting algorithm elevated Price's case involvement probability to its highest level ever. providing the foundation for the team to move toward deeper evaluation of his behavior, habits, and personal history to build a more legally robust suspect profile. The search of Walter Price's property not only yielded notable evidence, but also opened the opportunity to apply modern forensic techniques to determine the degree of linkage between these items and the Cookson Hills scene. In the 1970s, soil and microfiber analysis capabilities were virtually non-existent in Oklahoma, but by 2006, OSBI possessed mineral comparison technology, soil microstructure analysis, and fabric fiber spectroscopy, allowing maximum extraction of forensic value from aged evidence. First, the forensic team focused on soil samples taken from the toolbox in Price's shed, where the suspect rope was stored. Although time had altered the structure somewhat, many small soil particles remained lodged in the rope's twisted grooves. Analysts used microparticle separation to collect micrometer-sized grains, then subjected them to XRD mineral analysis. At the 2006 remains discovery scene, investigators had also collected soil samples from multiple spots near the exposed bones, around the rotted tree stump where the decomposed rope was found, and from the layer directly beneath decayed leaves. When comparing the two sample sets, the mineral analysis showed characteristic Cookson Hills signatures, high quartz content, red hematite layers, and finely ground shale, typical of eastern Oklahoma hills. However, what made the results noteworthy was the match in secondary mineral distribution, specifically a blend of feldspar microparticles and montmorillonite clay that appeared densely only in the forested area of the remain site and not in common soil types near Price's home. Quantitative analysis showed the soil adhering to Price's rope matched over 70% of the microstructure with the body site sample, while yard soil at his home matched only about 20%. This led the forensic team to assess a very high likelihood that the rope had once been present at the burial location. Beyond soil, the team continued with fiber analysis. The fabric fragment found near the remains was heavily degraded, but retained twisted cotton fibers in a loose weave typical of 1970s children's clothing. Fibers recovered from the blue button at Price's home, mostly remnants in the thread, were isolated for structural and chemical testing. Under optical microscopy, both samples showed S-twist configuration with comparable fiber density. When subjected to FTIR analysis, the absorption spectra of the two cotton fibers displayed high matching in cellulose-related regions and surface treatment signatures. Notably, the scene fabric contained faded indigo dye traces, aligning with residual color on the button from Price's home. Although a 100% determination that both fabrics came from the same garment was impossible, the compatibility in structure, weave type, composition, and color exceeded random chance levels. The forensic report noted that such multi-parameter coincidence rarely occurs without a related origin. Forensic specialists also considered cross-contamination possibilities. For example, that the rope or button could have been brought to Cookson Hills during Price's work. But soil analysis showed the adhering soil on the rope matched precisely the remains discovery site soil, not the general forest areas where he collected scrap wood. This reinforced the conclusion that the evidence had not merely been in the woods, but specifically at the crime-related location. Concurrently, OSBA evaluated the likelihood that both fiber samples came from Emily's clothing based on family records. The 1977 report described Emily wearing a light blue cotton shirt when leaving church. The light blue button color from Price's home, combined with the faded indigo traces in the scene fabric, matched to that description. Although over 30 years made DNA confirmation unfeasible, the overall fabric compatibility, per forensic assessment, reached a high level, meaning a strong probability of shared origin or the same type of children's clothing sold during that era. Combining the soil match and fiber match, the forensic report concluded that one soil adhering to the rope at Price's home was highly compatible with soil from the remains site. Two fibers from the button at Price's home were highly compatible with degraded scene fibers. 3. No reasonable explanation existed for both evidence types appearing in Price's possessions unless he had direct contact with the burial area or the victim herself. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, evidence tied to Price carried clear forensic value, stronger than any data collected in 1977. OSBI's conclusion placed Price in the prime suspect position, not only on behavioral and locational grounds, but also with physical evidence, the necessary foundation for the investigative team to advance to stronger legal steps. After the forensic results strongly reinforced suspicion against Walter Price, the investigative team shifted to the next objective, breaking Price's 1977 alibi, which he had repeated in subsequent interviews. In the original file, Price claimed that on the afternoon Emily disappeared, he was at the garage from 1 o'clock to 5 p.m., working on 2 regular customers' vehicles, but even then, the statement lacked verification from any independent witness. In 2006, with access to archived data from multiple agencies and the ability to retrieve work records under modern standards, the investigative team could for the first time thoroughly examine this claim. The first step was to reassemble all garage records from where Price had worked, including repair invoices, vehicle intake forms, parts issuance logs, and internal journals stored in the former owner's old file archive. Among these documents, many 1977 invoices were deteriorated, but still largely legible. No invoice recorded repair activity on the day Emily disappeared that matched the description of 2 regular customers dropping off vehicles and returning later to pick them up. Even the parts log showed no components checked out during the time frame. Price said he replaced parts for customers, making his statement inconsistent. Next, the team located the 2 customers Price had named in his 1977 interview. The first confirmed that his vehicle had been left at the garage that morning, but stated there was no interaction whatsoever with Price during the afternoon. The second even said their vehicle had not been brought to the garage that day, but the following day, rendering the detail of 2 vehicles needing repair in the same afternoon entirely false. In addition, OSBI obtained archived time clock logs from the former garage owner, a document unavailable to 1977 police, which recorded that only 1 mechanic was working that afternoon, and it was not Price. This immediately demolished the main pillar of his alibi. When cross-referencing his 1977 statements with those from 2006 interviews, the team identified numerous clear contradictions. In 1977, Price said he never left the garage all afternoon, but in 2006 he said he couldn't remember whether he left to get parts. Another detail showed he shifted the customer's pickup time from late afternoon to around after 5:30, while the customers verified they did not meet Price directly. Furthermore, his inability to identify anyone present at the garage with him or passing by made the statement impossible to corroborate. The team also analyzed the digitized map to determine whether Price could have left the garage, committed the crime, and returned unnoticed. The time analysis model showed that if Price left the garage around 3:10 p.m. and traveled to County Road 784, where Emily was last seen, he could arrive precisely within the 20-minute investigative gap. Afterward, if he transported the victim into the forest via the shortest trail identified by GIS analysis and returned to the garage, the total travel time still fell within the unprovable window. This stripped his at the garage the whole time claim of any credibility. Another verification step involved a former coworker from 1977. This person stated that the garage often closed temporarily in the afternoon if the owner was absent, and mechanics could come and go freely. That statement inadvertently supported the hypothesis that Price could easily leave the garage undetected. When cross-referencing Price's 1977 statements, 2006 statements, newly retrieved garage records, customer verifications, and travel route analysis, the investigative team concluded that Price's alibi was not merely weak, but completely shattered. All the elements that once kept him outside direct suspicion in the 1970s had become major vulnerabilities. He could not prove his whereabouts at any critical moment. His statements conflicted with objective data, and his evasive details drastically reduced credibility. In the official report submitted to OSBA, the team described Price's alibi as no longer valid and clearly contradictory to independent verified data, advancing him a major step from potential suspect to the sole prime suspect capable of committing the crime on the afternoon of August 14, 1977. Walter Price was summoned for a second interview after his alibi was fully dismantled, and a series of new evidence emerged from the property search. Unlike the 1977 session, where police had only suspicion, the 2006 interview was carefully prepared, with investigators from both Cherokee County and OSBI present. The goal was not to force a confession, but to confront Price with objective data he could not deny. The interview began by reconstructing the full timeline of August 14, 1977. On a large screen in the interview room, the time Emily left the church, witness sightings of the dark brown pickup, the family's start of the search, the bicycle discovery location, and finally the remains discovery site. Investigators asked Price to explain his whereabouts between 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock p.m., the time frame matching the 20-minute investigative gap. Price repeated his old answer that he was at the garage the entire afternoon. At that point, an OSBI investigator placed a copy of the 1977 time clock log in front of him, showing only one mechanic worked that afternoon, and it was not him. When Price responded by saying he didn't remember exactly, the investigator continued with customer confirmations that they did not see him all afternoon, dismantling the last piece of alibi he clung to. From there, the interview shifted to confronting the evidence. On the table were placed 3 items: the marked Cookson Hills map, the rope segment, and the blue button. Investigators asked Price to explain why his map had a circle exactly near the remains discovery area. Price replied that he only marked old hunting trails, but when investigators displayed the GIS overlay and demonstrated that the circle on Price's map precisely matched the feasible perpetrator movement route, a trail not widely used and known only to those very familiar with the terrain, Price began to appear flustered. He tried to explain that all hunters knew that path, but when asked to describe the specific trail entrance, he could not answer. This was recorded as the first contradiction. Next came the rope segment. Investigators placed the soil analysis results in front of him, showing microparticles adhering to the rope matched the exact remains discovery area. When asked why his rope carried soil from Cookson Hills Forest, Price said he occasionally went into the woods for scrap wood. Investigators immediately presented a map based on witness statements and historical GPS, proving Price typically frequented a completely different area, nearly 2 miles from the remains site. The fact that the rope carried soil characteristic only of the body location undermined his scrap wood explanation. The second contradiction was recorded. The blue button was placed on the table last. Investigators remained silent for several seconds, simply observing Price's reaction. When he asked, "What does this have to do with anything?" the investigator presented Emily's 1977 clothing description record, clearly stating, light blue cotton shirt, round plastic blue buttons. Price's button matched, nearly exactly in size and material, to the type common on children's clothing of that era. When asked why he had a blue child's button in his home, despite having no daughters or granddaughters living with him, Price could offer no reasonable explanation. He said it might have been picked up in the garage, but investigators pointed out that the button box was in his personal wardrobe drawer, not the garage, and the other buttons in the box were all adult male clothing sizes. This became the third and most serious contradiction. When cornered with no room for simple explanations, Price shifted defensive strategy. He claimed the map was left by the previous owner, the rope was put in his toolbox by someone else, and the button might have stuck to his clothes somewhere. All these explanations were refuted by digitized data and forensic results. Investigators continued highlighting smaller contradictions. Price claimed he did not wear a baseball cap in 1977, but his driver's license photo showed him wearing exactly the type the witness described. He said he was unfamiliar with forest trails, yet possessed a Cookson Hills map more detailed than those used by local hunters. He insisted he never drove out of the garage, but timeline analysis showed sufficient time to reach Route 784 and return. When asked directly, "Can you explain why all the evidence points to you?" Price fell silent, then answered that it's just coincidence. OSBI recorded this response as a sign of incongruent stress reaction for an innocent person, a significant behavioral assessment. At the end of the interview, Price was not arrested as no final legal decision had been made, but the record noted that he could not coherently or consistently explain 1. The marked map location. 2. Cookson Hills soil on the rope. 3. The presence of a child's blue button matching the victim's clothing description. 4. Contradictions between his statements and garage records. 5. The presence of a matching vehicle on the victim's disappearance route. The second interview concluded with the official assessment. Walter Price no longer maintained any portion of his original alibi, and all data, behavioral, temporal, evidentiary, converged on him as the sole suspect capable of committing the crime on the afternoon of August 14, 1977. In the days following the second interview, Walter Price was invited for one additional informal session after he proactively contacted investigators, stating he wanted to clarify some misunderstandings. This is a familiar tactic of suspects when they feel the legal net tightening, offering partial truth or an alternative version to mitigate legal responsibility before incriminating evidence is fully solidified. In this session, Price provided a new statement for the first time, admitting contact with Emily Ellison on the day she disappeared. He claimed he happened to encounter Emily while she was walking her bicycle on the roadside, that he offered to help fix a misaligned wheel, and that everything after that was an unintended accident. According to Price's version, Emily fell while trying to remount the bicycle, struck her head on a rock, and died instantly, causing him to panic and hide the body in the woods for fear of being blamed. He explained the map as to find a temporary burial spot, the rope as to drag the body along the trail, and the button as stuck to his clothing while carrying the body. Although this statement admitted contact, the investigative team immediately subjected it to serious analysis and cross-checked it against forensic data for verification. OSBI began by assessing the feasibility of the accident claim. First, cross-referencing the bicycle position, the bike was found deep in concealing brush, handlebars turned inward, no heavy skid marks on the wheels, inconsistent with a natural fall pattern. A fall severe enough to fatally injure a 12-year-old typically leaves long skid marks or disturbed ground. The scene showed no such signs. Next came analysis of the mandible and rib bones from the remains. There were no acute fractures in the head or neck region, directly contradicting the description of striking the head hard enough to cause instant death. Cranial analysis showed no cracking from blunt force trauma. This nearly completely ruled out death by accident. OSBI also evaluated the claim that Price dragged the body with the rope. However, the rope recovered from Price's home showed lateral wear patterns, characteristic of binding or tightening rather than drag friction patterns. Soil match further proved the rope had been directly at the remains discovery area, but no signs suggested it was used to drag a heavy object across forest ground. If the rope had been used for dragging as claimed, adhering soil should show elongated friction structure, not deep embedded microparticles in twisted cores, as the analysis revealed. Cross-referencing the claim that carrying the body caused the button to stick to his clothing, forensics noted no mechanism for a button to detach from the victim's shirt in a simple accident scenario, without corresponding tearing or fabric fragments, none of which were found at the scene. The fabric fragment near the remains also showed no violent tear from impact. Instead, it exhibited natural long-term degradation. Another inconsistency emerged when cross-referencing the timeline. Price claimed he only met Emily after she stopped because the bicycle malfunctioned, but time analysis and witness data showed Emily never stopped riding from the church to the disappearance point. The last witness saw her pedaling normally. GIS data indicated no reasonable stopping point near the bicycle discovery location. The bike could only enter the brush if placed there, not from a fall. Finally, Price's accident version failed to explain why the body was located over 3 miles away, deep in Cookson Hills, reachable only via secluded trails known to terrain-familiar individuals. An accident could not produce deliberate body transport to that location. When Price's entire statement was subjected to behavioral analysis, OSB concluded it exhibited responsibility minimization, a common suspect tactic when facing overwhelming evidence. This behavior typically appears when a suspect knows forensic data has surpassed deniability, forcing partial admission to reduce perceived severity of guilt. OSB's final report stated clearly, The account provided by Walter Price is inconsistent with the scene, inconsistent with skeletal analysis, inconsistent with the timeline, and inconsistent with forensic logic. Physical data completely contradict the accident description. Price's statement was not only rejected, but became counterproductive evidence, reinforcing the conclusion that his contact with the victim was not incidental or accidental, but intentional, planned, and aimed at concealing serious criminal conduct. After Walter Price's accident statement was fully refuted by forensics, the investigative team moved to the pivotal phase, synthesizing all accumulated data over nearly 30 years to construct a legally robust prosecutable case meeting Oklahoma State Court standards for an arrest warrant. This process began by consolidating four main data groups: physical evidence, forensics, timeline, and witness statements, into a unified investigative report. In the physical evidence section, the team clearly presented the three key items obtained from the Price property search warrant: the marked Cookson Hills map, aligning with the remains discovery location, the rope segment carrying soil characteristic of the body site, and the blue button matching the type of children's clothing described as Emily's on the day she disappeared. Each item was linked to scientific analysis chains. The map demonstrated terrain familiarity, the rope matched soil profile, the button aligned with victim clothing description. All were contextualized by the fact that Price offered no reasonable explanation for their presence in his personal possessions. The forensics section was drafted separately, detailing the soil match and fiber match. The soil match was illustrated with mineral charts and microparticle distribution. Soil in the rope's core matched over 70% of the mineral structure with soil from the remains site, a compatibility far exceeding random chance. The fiber match was presented with FTIR spectra and microscopic images showing twist structure, dye type, and cellulose composition of scene fibers compatible with fibers remaining on Price's button. The forensic report emphasized that both evidence types have a high probability of having been present at the site where Emily Ellison's body was placed. The 1977-2006 timeline was converted into a simulated chronological axis, clearly showing convergence of temporal and spatial factors toward Price. The 20-minute victim disappearance window matched Price's unprovable alibi gap. Digitized data indicated his home was closest to both key locations, the bicycle scene and the burial area. His vehicle fully matched witness descriptions and appeared at the right time. Moreover, GIS analysis showed the necessary forest route to transport the body to the discovery site was one known only to terrain-familiar individuals, and Price's map proved he belonged to that group. The witness statement section included both 1977 accounts and 2006 re-interviews. The report highlighted that one witness, using modern memory recall techniques, confirmed seeing the dark brown pickup stopped near the tree line at the exact time Emily vanished. The witness described the man beside the vehicle as matching Price's 1977 build, clothing, and demeanor. In the evaluation of Price's statements, the file detailed contradictions. He repeatedly altered alibi descriptions. His garage work claims were unverified and refuted by time clock records. Explanations for the rope button and map were incompatible with forensic data, and especially, the accident version conflicted with all scene traces and skeletal injury characteristics. The investigative report also attached behavioral analysis based on CODIS-type profiling. Evasion of details, minimization of severity, and stress reactions when confronted with evidence were typical of a guilty suspect. After consolidating the four data groups, the team drafted the legal conclusion section, listing charging elements under Oklahoma's probable cause standard. 1. Price's presence near the scene during the victim's disappearance window. 2. Evidence at Price's property matching scene evidence. 3. False statements and completely shattered alibi. 4. Strong forensic support linking Price to the burial area. 5. Perpetrator movement model matching Price's habits and terrain capability. The full prosecutable case file was compiled into a report exceeding 300 pages and submitted to the county prosecutor and judge for an arrest warrant. The file recorded that the evidence not only independently reinforced suspicion but, when combined, formed a logical chain, a consistent structure leading to a single conclusion. Walter Price possessed the motive, opportunity, means, and behavior to abduct and cause the death of Emily Ellison on August 14, 1977. The report was submitted with forensic appendices and GIS extracts, forming a solid foundation for the next legal step, requesting court approval of an arrest warrant for the suspect after nearly 3 decades of evasion. The arrest warrant for Walter Price was approved by the Cherokee County judge on the morning of April 18, 2006, after reviewing the entire prosecutable case file and concluding that the level of probable cause had been clearly met. Immediately, OSBI coordinated with the Muskogee Police Department, where Price was residing, to implement a controlled arrest plan designed to prevent any risk of Price destroying documents, fleeing, or harming others. The task force was divided into 2 teams. One team surveilled Price's home from dawn to record daily activity, while the other prepared to approach the front door using standard knock-and-announce tactics. At 6:42 a.m., as Price opened the back door to feed his dog, the arrest team received the signal to move in. 2 officers closed in from the backyard, while the main team approached the front door and announced the warrant. Price appeared surprised but did not resist. He stood motionless for a few seconds before raising his hands, as instructed, and was handcuffed on the spot. When asked if he knew the reason for his arrest, Price only said, "I guess it's about that thing from 1977. The entire process took less than 3 minutes with no incidents. As the police vehicle carrying Price left the area, many residents in the Muskogee neighborhood began stepping out of their homes, silently watching the convoy pass. Some longtime neighbors appeared stunned. As for them, Price was a quiet, sometimes eccentric man who had never caused trouble. An elderly woman repeatedly said, "He fixed our cars for over 20 years. I never thought he was involved in anything like this." News of the arrest spread rapidly through the Muskogee and Tahlequah communities within hours. Many residents who had lived in the County Road 784 area in the late 1970s recalled the desperate search days after Emily vanished and expressed astonishment upon learning that one of the people who had lived nearby for so many years had become the prime suspect. Some former volunteers who participated in the 1977 search said they felt not surprised but chilled because Price had always been quietly mentioned in community suspicion, but never with enough evidence. In Tahlequah, where the case had once been a lingering trauma, the community's initial reaction was mixed. Part relief that after nearly 30 years, a real suspect had finally been arrested, part pain because the truth, whatever its nature, would force the town to confront old memories they had tried to seal away. Many who had been teenagers in 1977 shared that the arrest of Price made them realize the perpetrator could have lived near them for years, shopped at the same stores, attended the same church services, driven the same roads, without anyone suspecting. Local news stations quickly arrived in Muskogee and Tahlequah to capture community reactions. On television, footage of Price being led away flanked by 2 officers was broadcast widely, sparking conflicting commentary. Some viewed the arrest as a major step toward justice. Others expressed skepticism, questioning whether forensic evidence and modern technology could lead to a mistaken conclusion, especially in a case more than 3 decades old. At the old school Emily once attended, many retired teachers called one another, recalling the cheerful image of the little girl with her silver-blue bicycle. The arrest brought back the sad memories of a small town accustomed to peace, unable to imagine that Emily's disappearance case could be closed by a suspect who had stood among them for so many years. The Ellison family, now living outside Tahlequah, was notified by OSBI just before the warrant was made public. They issued no media statements, but released a brief notice stating, "This is the first step in a very long journey we have waited nearly 30 years for." That night, Price's old home in Tahlequah, where he had lived in 1977, drew residents who stood watching, pointing, and exchanging fragmented memories about the man who had previously attracted little attention. No one understood why he had chosen to live so quietly for so many years. No one knew that an old map, a piece of rope, and a single button could become the most damning accusations. In Muskogee, police increased patrols around his neighborhood to prevent curious crowds from gathering. Local online forums began filling with dense discussions about the 1977 case, the dark brown pickup many vaguely remembered, and how a dedicated auto mechanic could be accused of such a horrific crime. Though community reactions were not uniform, the one shared sentiment was shock. After 3 decades, Oklahoma communities once again faced the old question. The perpetrator of a child's disappearance could be anyone, even someone they once thought harmless. After Walter Price was arrested and transferred to the Cherokee County Jail, the Oklahoma State Prosecutor's Office entered the trial preparation phase, a step requiring absolute precision in organizing evidence, anticipating defense strategies, and building the charging structure, according to state criminal procedure standards. The lead prosecutor immediately assessed that the Emily Ellison case did not rest on a direct confession but on a system of circumstantial evidence connected by modern forensics and behavioral analysis. Therefore, the charging logic had to form a coherent chain with no weak links. In the first step, the prosecutor's office categorized all evidence into 2 groups: direct evidence and high legal strength circumstantial evidence. The direct evidence group did not include eyewitnesses who saw Price abduct Emily, because none existed, but included the soil match between Price's rope and soil from the remains discovery site, the fiber match between the button at Price's home and the fabric fragment at the scene, and the timeline constructed from digitized data proving Price had no alibi. These were scientific pieces that could stand independently in court and force the defense to counter with expert rebuttal rather than mere denial. The circumstantial evidence group included the map with circles matching the body location, Price's contradictory statements over the years, the absence of any reasonable explanation for the evidence found in his home, the 1977 witness descriptions matching Price's vehicle, and the GIS analysis of the perpetrator's route. The prosecutor determined that these pieces alone did not constitute proof, but when layered together, they created a chain of logic that cannot be explained innocently. The next critical step was preparing expert witnesses. The prosecutor contacted 3 forensic expert groups, 1 the soil analysis team, responsible for explaining the soil profile to the jury in understandable language. 2. The fiber analysis team, presenting FTIR results and fiber comparison mechanisms. 3. The GIS analysis team, simulating the perpetrator's movement path. Each expert group had to prepare condensed reports compliant with Oklahoma Rule 702, ensuring rigor while remaining accessible to a non-scientific jury. The prosecutor also required the forensic experts to present using visual aids, side-by-side soil sample charts in color, microscopic views of cotton fiber structure, and digitized map simulations of movement. The goal was to make the jury see the matches between evidence items not as coincidence, but as the inevitable result of Price's presence at the scene. Meanwhile, the investigative and prosecutorial team built the charging structure in 3 layers. Layer 1, proving Price had the opportunity to commit the crime, broken alibi timeline, home location, matching vehicle, witness confirmation of the dark brown pickup. Layer 2, proving Price had physical contact with the victim or scene, soil match, fiber match, marked map. Layer 3, proving Price intentionally concealed the act, contradictory statements, moving the body deep into the forest, knowledge of secluded trails. The prosecutor placed particular emphasis on Price's vulnerability, his changing statements over decades, and the accident version refuted by science. This would be one of the central pillars of the case, easily impactful on a jury, because it demonstrated consciousness of guilt and post-crime concealment. Concurrently, the prosecution team prepared to anticipate defense strategies, which were likely to revolve around 3 arguments: 1 forensic evidence compromised due to excessive time passage, 2 items in Price's home, merely coincidental, 3 no direct eyewitness to the abduction. The prosecutor prepared responses for each on time passage. Modern forensics can analyze trace minerals and fiber structure unaffected by age. On coincidence, the probability of 3 independent items matching the scene is near 0. On lack of direct witnesses, Oklahoma law does not require direct evidence if the circumstantial chain is strong and consistent. The prosecutor also prepared a list of lay witnesses, including the person who found the bicycle, witnesses who saw the brown pickup, Price's former neighbors, describing his 1977 behavior and travel habits. and the former garage owner confirming time clock records. All would be sequenced logically so the jury could follow the case progression like a coherent story. Disappearance, stalled investigated remains discovery forensics, physical evidence, concealment behavior. Conclusion. The final part of preparation was rehearsing courtroom delivery. The prosecutor simulated jury reactions, tested slide presentations, charts, and GIS maps. They also practiced Q&A with forensic experts to avoid overwhelming the jury with scientific jargon. The goal was not to complicate the case, but to make it so clear it became irrefutable. Once the full charging structure was complete, the prosecutor assessed that the case, though lacking direct evidence, possessed something many other cold cases did not: a consistent chain stretching from 1977 to 2006, in which every ambiguity led to a single individual. This would be the foundation for entering trial, where justice for Emily Ellison would finally have the chance to be established after nearly 30 years of waiting. Walter Price's trial took place in late fall 2006 at the Cherokee County Courthouse, drawing intense public interest because it was the first time in nearly 3 decades that the full sequence of the Emily Ellison case would be reconstructed before the public. The prosecution opened with a concise presentation, focusing on the 3 central pillars of the case: physical evidence, forensics, and timeline, all meticulously prepared over many months. First, the physical evidence portion was presented in the logical sequence the prosecution had predetermined. The Cookson Hills map was displayed on a large screen, with 2 faint circles clearly visible in the deep forest area, matching the remains discovery site. The prosecutor explained that Price had possessed this map since the 1970s and had no reasonable explanation for marking a location outside ordinary hunting paths. When questioning the OSBI investigator witness about the map's significance, the witness affirmed that the circles demonstrated terrain familiarity consistent with the perpetrator's access route model. Next, the rope segment found in Price's storage shed was introduced. The prosecutor showed close-up photographs highlighting soil lodged in the rope's twisted core, then transitioned to mineral comparison charts. Arrows marking matching ratios of quartz, hematite, and montmorillonite drew clear jury attention. When defense counsel objected that the rope could have been brought to Cookson Hills innocently, the prosecutor immediately asked the forensic expert to explain why the microparticle structure embedded deep in the twisted core indicated the rope had been at the precise remains discovery area, not anywhere else in the vast Cookson Hills range. The final physical evidence item was the blue button, the smallest but most impactful. The prosecutor showed the jury a photograph of the shirt Emily was described as wearing on the day she disappeared, along with the 1977 report description, light blue cotton shirt with small round plastic blue buttons. When a close-up image of Price's button appeared, the color and size similarity was enlarged on screen. The forensic expert then explained the fiber analysis process and stated that fibers remaining on Price's button had absorption spectra significantly matching the seen fabric fragment. With the physical evidence foundation firmly laid, the prosecution moved to the most critical part: forensics. The soil expert presented first, using a 3D model to describe Cookson Hills forest stratigraphy and highlighting why soil at the body site carried rare characteristic markers in the region. They displayed comparison charts between soil in the rope and samples from areas Price claimed to have visited. The differences were stark. Next came the fiber analysis expert. She presented microscopic images of the S-twist cotton structure, typical of the 1970s, illustrating how the refractive index of the seen fabric matched that from Price's button. Though a 100% conclusion of identical origin was impossible, she affirmed that the high degree of compatibility far exceeds random probability. The forensics portion concluded with the GIS expert's presentation, the part most easily grasped by the jury. The digitized map showed 3 key points: the church, the bicycle discovery location, and the remains site. The victim's simulated travel path appeared in green, while the perpetrator's feasible movement model was overlaid in red. When the forest route the perpetrator could have used appeared, the prosecutor paused and overlaid Price's map onto the GIS map. The 2 circles aligned perfectly. The courtroom fell silent for several seconds. Finally, the prosecutor introduced the timeline, the backbone of the entire argument. Data were presented as a chronological chart showing each milestone. 3:10 p.m. Emily leaves the church. 3:28 p.m. Witness sees dark brown pickup. 3:32 p.m. Bicycle location determined by reanalysis. 3:50 p.m. Price's unprovable alibi window. 5:00 p.m. Family begins search. Arrows tracing Price's possible movement were overlaid on actual roads, proving he had sufficient time to reach the victim, place her in the vehicle, and move into the forest within the exact 20-minute gap. When juxtaposing Price's statements across 3 decades, the prosecutor highlighted contradictions. In 1977, he said he never left the garage. In 1993, he said he didn't remember. In 2006, he admitted meeting Emily, but described it as an accident. This pattern of change was framed as concealment behavior. During the timeline presentation, one juror took continuous notes. Another shook their head when the pickup simulation image appeared. All reactions reflected one reality. The charging structure had been built tightly enough for them to see the events of August 14, 1977, not as disconnected incidents, but as a single logical line leading to Walter Price. The prosecution's portion of the trial ended in a heavy but consistent atmosphere. Physical evidence connected to forensics. Forensics connected to timeline. Timeline connected to behavior, and all pointed to one person. After 2 weeks of trial and 3 days of deliberation, the jury entered the courtroom with tense but resolute faces. When the judge asked if they had reached a verdict, the jury foreman stood and declared, "Yes, Your Honor." The result was read clearly before the packed courtroom. Walter Price was found guilty of first-degree murder under Oklahoma law, based on the chain of circumstantial evidence, forensics, timeline, behavior, physical evidence, all interconnected to form an irrefutable, logical system. Price stood motionless, expressionless, staring down at the table, his hands clenched in front of him. Defense counsel requested a delay in sentencing, but the court denied it. During the sentencing phase, the prosecutor argued that Price's conduct demonstrated premeditation, planning, and intent to conceal spanning nearly 3 decades. That the victim was a minor, and that the family had suffered irreparable, long-lasting consequences. Based on those aggravating factors, the court sentenced Walter Price to life imprisonment without parole. The courtroom fell silent for several seconds after the sentence was pronounced. From the back row, the Ellison family sat holding hands, not breaking into tears, but with faces showing a painful release. An ending they had waited nearly 29 years for. They made no statements, only nodding as the judge acknowledged their loss in the trial record. Immediately after sentencing, the court issued its official legal conclusion, outlining the decisive factors that solved the case. First, the evidence recovered from Price's home formed a unified group, in which the map demonstrated terrain knowledge, the rope matched the soil profile, and the button showed significant fiber match with the scene fabric fragment. Second, modern forensic analysis, particularly the soil match and fiber match, provided decisive scientific evidence that overcame the nearly 3-decade time barrier. Third, the digitized timeline proved Price had the opportunity to commit the crime when his alibi was completely dismantled. Combining the timeline with GIS simulation showed the perpetrator had to be familiar with the terrain, precisely matching Price. Fourth, Price's contradictory statements across decades, along with the accident version refuted by forensics, demonstrated concealment and illogical criminal behavior. Fifth, the 2006 witness statement, obtained through modern cognitive memory recall interview techniques, reinforced the presence of the dark brown pickup, consistent with Price's vehicle description. The court's legal conclusion emphasized that this case was a textbook example of reactivating a cold case through modern technology, and that the law can pursue justice to the end, even after nearly 3 decades. As Price was escorted from the courtroom, many residents of Tahlequah and Muskogee stood silently in the courthouse hallway. Some shared that it was hard to believe a man who had lived quietly his entire life had carried a criminal secret for nearly 30 years. Others said they felt relief because the prosecution had finally proven what the community had only dared to suspect. Closing the Emily Ellison file was not just the end of one case, but an acknowledgement that justice, though slow, can still arrive. The court entered into the record. The case of Emily Ellison, missing since 1977, is officially closed. A 29-year cold case had been solved. And the decisive factor in breaking it, as the prosecutor stated in conclusion, was not only forensic technology, not only physical evidence, but the persistence of the investigative team, the refusal to overlook the smallest details, and the belief that truth may be buried but cannot disappear. Looking back on the entire investigation of the Emily Ellison case after Walter Price's life sentence, it reveals a journey spanning nearly 3 decades, a journey stalled by the limitations of 1977, but revived by the forensic advances of 2006. In summarizing the case, investigators clearly analyzed 3 groups of factors: initial shortcomings, technical breakthroughs that solved it, and important lessons for handling similar missing persons cases. First were the shortcomings of 1977, largely stemming from technological and procedural limitations of the era rather than subjective error. When Emily disappeared, police relied primarily on manual searches, witness statements, and visual scene observation. The bicycle found in brush was not treated as central evidence due to the lack of soil trace analysis capability and no standardized microfiber collection protocol. The scene was not fully secured, allowing small traces like fabric fibers or soil samples to be easily disturbed. Additionally, screening of suspect vehicles relied only on the vague description brown pickup, so Price was not held for deeper investigation. His timeline was not verified by time clock records or independent witnesses, leaving a weak alibi unchallenged. In particular, there was no GIS technology to evaluate the feasibility of the perpetrator's possible routes, so the importance of terrain familiarity was overlooked. As a result, the case quickly became data deficient, forming a cold case within months of Emily's disappearance. By 2006, forensic breakthroughs became the key to reopening the case. Soil analysis represented the biggest advance. XRD technology enabled trace mineral analysis from soil particles lodged in the core of Price's rope, impossible in 1977. By identifying the unique mineral signature of the Cookson Hills area, especially the rare Montmorillonite ratio, the forensic team confirmed the rope had been at the exact remains discovery site, dismantling Price's entire coincidental version. Fiber analysis also played a crucial role when FTIR spectra showed fibers on Price's button, significantly matching the scene fabric fragment, turning this tiny item into a critical link tying Price to the scene. GIS technology enabled spatial reconstruction, something completely absent in 1977, revealing that only someone familiar with the terrain could have chosen the hidden route to the burial location. Digitized timeline allowed overlaying witness data, actual travel times, and home location, completely collapsing Price's alibi. Finally, modern cognitive memory recall interview techniques enabled one witness to recall the dark brown pickup's presence, something they could not precisely articulate in 1977. Together, these formed a chain of forensic breakthroughs, each piece alone insufficient, but combined powerful enough to solve the cold case. From the Emily Ellison case, investigators drew 3 major lessons for similar missing persons investigations. First, collect evidence, even when no analysis technology exists. Small items like fabric fibers, adhering soil, buttons, once dismissed as irrelevant in 1977, became decisive evidence nearly 30 years later. Therefore, any missing person scene requires evidence preservation protocols similar to homicide scenes. Second, build objective timelines from multiple data sources. An alibi statement cannot be deemed credible without independent corroboration. Retaining work logs, vehicle history notes, and time-based records forms the foundation for reanalysis decades later. Third, update cold case files with technological progress. Thousands of missing persons files across the U.S. may contain items once considered useless, but modern forensics can turn them into incriminating evidence. Periodic reevaluation of files, especially when new technology emerges, is the only way to prevent cases from being buried forever. OSBI's official summary stated that the Emily Ellison case is a rare demonstration that a missing persons case with no eyewitnesses, no cameras, no DNA can still be solved through persistence, fresh perspectives on old data, and scientific progress. The shortcomings of 1977 became the foundation for 2006 to prove that justice can be delayed but not forgotten. The case is closed, but the new investigative processes born from this experience will continue and protect other children from becoming forgotten. Cold cases once again. The story of the Emily Ellison case, a disappearance that seemed buried by time for nearly 30 years, reflects many issues American society still faces today, particularly in child protection, criminal investigation, and community awareness. A key detail of the story is that in 1977, despite the bicycle being found in brush and fairly clear witness statements about the dark brown pickup, investigators could not advance further due to the lack of soil analysis, fiber analysis, or timeline reconstruction tools. This highlights an important lesson in modern life. Where technology advances rapidly, we cannot afford to dismiss any small detail, whether physical evidence or unusual community signs. The fact that a tiny blue button, overlooked for nearly 3 decades, became the key to solving the case through modern forensics, underscores the importance of preserving data, records, and evidence, even in situations that appear nothing happened. In the United States today, as communities increasingly rely on security cameras, GPS data, and digital identification, the Emily Ellison story reminds us that technology is powerful, but human vigilance is even more so. If in 1977 neighbors had maintained the habit of reporting every strange vehicle in the area, or if Price's lack of alibi had been more rigorously checked, the case might not have dragged on for nearly 30 years. In addition, the case conveys an important lesson for parents and communities. Unusual behaviors, even small ones, like an adult man owning a forest map with faint markings or giving vague explanations for absences, should not be ignored. In America, where community watch movements are encouraged, this story serves as a reminder that every citizen's alertness is the first line of defense in protecting children. Finally, the case also shows that justice can arrive late but does not disappear, as long as society does not give up the search for truth. Thank you for following the entire journey of solving a cold case that lasted nearly 3 decades. If you found the story helpful and meaningful, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next cases. See you in the next video, where we continue exploring how justice can find its way back even after a very long time has passed.